If you were to describe these last few days with one word, it would be rescued. Because all we see are people being rescued. Pets, too, from rooftops, from cars. But you're also seeing another kind of rescue, one from all those conflicts that occurred before the flood. Stuff about statues and privilege and gender identity and trigger warnings. These stories still exist, but in times of crisis, they seem to fade. But some still pop up as a reminder of how things used to be. Right now, there are cities planning to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Day. I don't know what to think, except that it's got to be cool to have all that time on your hands to debate that stuff in dry, comfortable weather. Meanwhile, people are being airlifted from certain death. It's such a powerful contrast, at least to me. Now, these conflicts over statues and historical figures, they exist in good times because we have the time to discuss it. But a disaster rescues us from such reoccurring division. Now, I know we're supposed to hate each other, says the media. And it must be hard for identity activists to see folks in trucker hats or hoodies rescuing people of all stripes. They can't wait to get back to the rage when the waters recede. But for now, tribulation silences all tribes. It's the calm that came with the terrible storm. Kimberly, I'm trying to contrast between real reality and made-for-TV outrage. We can have discussions about Indigenous Day and all that stuff. If we're not living a horrible life, if we're not thinking about how we're going to get back to our home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is the problem, yes. And when you see the faux outrage and the stories that people try to create and manufacture this, it seems so disingenuous, especially in the face of what we're witnessing and the Hurricane Harvey, the aftermath, the humans struggling, what in fact is going on a daily basis, minute by minute. We can't even imagine it if we were put in this position with our family and friends and wondering if our loved ones, where they are. They still haven't begun even recovery efforts in terms of the waters because they're too high. So the contrast is very difficult because now everything has become this completely elevated, blown out of proportion, hyperbolic catastrophe and crisis that nobody can seem to try to get their heads around. No matter how small it is, it becomes something that is magnified, to 1,000x.
Mm-hmm. Juan, Mayor de Blasio said before the flood that he was going to review all the hate statues in New York City. And I think it's a really good thing that he's doing this because obviously he's so shameful of the Democratic past and their love for slavery that he's finally agreeing to get rid of these reminders of his party's shameful past.
Wow. Now that's a question.
It's called loaded.
It's loaded.
I forgot to put a question mark at the end of that. So, what do you think about Columbus Day?
I can't wait to have it off. I don't get it off. I forgot.
And Columbus Circle.
Columbus Circle. What strikes me is that when we talk about the fact that the storm comes and that's a moment when we come together when there's crisis, I think it's true. I'm reminded there was a piece in the Wall Street Journal today written by James Baker and Andy Young. So James Baker used to be Secretary of State, and Andrew Young, former mayor of Atlanta, UN ambassador, I believe. And it basically said, we have to start talking to each other. We have to get back to the idea of solving problems. It reminded me of what the Defense Secretary Mattis said. He said the biggest problem we have is not ISIS or the terrorists. The biggest problem is our political structure is so broken, so polarized, we can't resolve anything here at home. We can't talk to each other.
Right.
And so to me, when you see the storm, just picking up on what you said, Greg, I think you're right. I think that it's a moment, it's almost like, you see people in the military or you see people on a police department. When you are dealing with something terrible, even with Jesse and me yelling at each other, guess what? I'd have his back. I mean, I trust he would have mine. It's just that kind of moment in life where, you know what? So I don't like the statue. You don't like the statue. You know what? I didn't like your mama. Oh, okay.
Hey, take it easy,
Take it
Juan.
easy.
Right there.
Oh, my God.
Now I'm not going to save you. So now your mom is off.
Mrs. Waters. Mrs. Waters, we're not talking about you.
I think your mother agrees with Juan more than she agrees with you.
100% of the time.
She's long-suffering.
You know how there's some people in life and you just can't picture the fact that they have parents?
Yeah.
Like Seinfeld, that's you. That's me. I can't believe that you have parents.
Oh, my God.
It's like you were
My
small.
parents can't believe they had me.
Yeah. Well, now that we've veered off topic, Jesse, these certain conflicts can only happen if everything else is going great, right?
We're so spoiled. Being offended by a statue or by a holiday is a luxury that Texas wished they had.
Right.
And, you know, they're renaming holidays. I just care if I'm off or not. I don't care what you call it. Indigenous, Columbus, it doesn't matter. Speaking of indigenous peoples, indigenous people all over the world live in Harvey-like conditions almost every day, where they lose their homes, they're worried about how wet they are, they're cold, they're hungry. That's the norm for those people. People act like being offended is worse than being starving, being wet, being homeless, being broke, being poor. I would rather be offended instead of all of that stuff, but people are so coddled in this country, they can't experience discomfort. They can't experience offense. Right. They think that's the worst thing in the world, so they walk around on eggshells, protecting other people, protecting themselves, and they have all their priorities out of whack. The LA City Council is voting on a holiday. Meanwhile, LA is it's like going to hell in a handbasket, and they're worried about a holiday.
And it's like 100 degrees there, too, by the way, right now.
Come on.
So literally, hell.
Well, there you go. Jillian, I think that all social justice warriors should be forced to watch the coverage of the storm nonstop, just to see what real suffering is like and how people come together and all these lines of demarcation kind of fade away.
You know, it's interesting because this guy walked into my office in the wake of Charlottesville, and he said, this is the only country where we're so short-fused that we're going to spark a civil war in response to monuments that were erected in the wake of the last Civil War. And I thought, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it that way before.
You're welcome.
So there's this idea of like transformative justice, and that is really important, right? People have to feel like they're welcome in the United States, and people have to feel like their own unique individual, you know, cultural heritages are respected at the very least, right? But it gets to a point where you can't. I lived in a country in South Africa for 2 years during graduate school where in the wake of apartheid there, people are so scared of anything that is unique nationally, culturally, in any way, that they have a list of like 75 national holidays, and they're called things like Family Day, Women's Day, Youth Day. You know, that's where we're headed here.
I don't mind that. I do not mind that.
Buy me a plane ticket.
Yeah.
No, just go down to Texas and Louisiana. I think they have the most holidays in the country.
Really?
Yeah.
But you don't want to get to a point where nothing is celebrated. You know what I mean? Everything is so generic that it actually doesn't mean anything.
I think we just have to put our priorities, you know, do a reset as a country in terms of putting things in perspective about what really matters in life, the health and safety of your loved ones. Look at the people out there. Their lives have been deleted. Literally, everything they knew, things that they loved, their possessions, anything that was tangible that they created or had for their families, gone.
So more holidays, more statues, that's the consensus?
There we go.
Yeah.
All right.
I think we've solved every world problem.